welcome to GoTarryn TV. This is Dr. T, PhD, the Prodigy of Sports Psychology, and today I'm welcoming you for a very special edition as part of this series of my data analysis from my dissertation. And if you've seen the very first one, which I did last week, then you'll know what to expect with today's episode. We're going to kind of follow the same type of pattern where today we're going to be seeing the interview of the second participant that I had in my sample of my study. And I wanted today, before I jump into that, tell you a little bit about what we're doing and why this was broken down not only to 10 weeks, but also to 10 participants. So let's start with why 10 weeks? Well, for any dissertation topic, there's always going to be what they call the 10 strategic key points. And basically, I'll jump into the other types of what those points' meanings are. I talked a little bit about them last week, talked a little bit about my sample and methodology and other things. But if you look at last week's very first key strategic point, it basically was the topic of the study. As I mentioned, the title of my dissertation was The Self-Determination of Millennials and the Realization of Their Personal Training Goals. And today, in our second week, we're going to look at what the second key strategic point encompasses, and that is the literature review. That is the, you can argue, heart and soul of the writing part of, in my case, 350 pages of a manuscript that started as a proposal and ended up eventually becoming a published dissertation. And in my case, in my own study, what was I looking at? Well, again, I'll jump into why millennials, why self-determination, why personal training goals as we go along further in the next several weeks. But specifically, the literature topic in terms of my study was addressing a problem, an epidemic issue of the United States, and that specifically was narrowed down to the southeast region where I reside in Atlanta, Georgia. But if you look at the last several decades and you just kind of pinpoint where the obesity problem began, right here in the last 50 to 60 years, you can argue that it's become quite the issue. And for certain, for a research academic study to be looking at that would be very valid. And that's why I wanted to do that. And let me take you back in time. Shortly after the first year of my PhD program, I went ahead and traveled to Phoenix, Arizona to the university to complete my first residency. And that's where I met my first two instructors, Dr. Kay Hansen and Dr. Paula Thompson. And they guided me on exactly what to do with this study. What I wanted to do was very close to what I ended up with. But mine was way too broad in general because, just to give you an idea what that looked like, I just wanted to look at what motivates people in general to lose weight and to be in better shape. And as anybody knows in academics, especially PhD candidates, that is way too broad in general of a topic. And like any dissertation, you really have to refine it and dig down deep into a very, very microscopic, narrow, almost just viewpoint of what you're studying. So in my case, my two residency instructors, as I mentioned, Dr. Hansen and Dr. Thompson, had me focus on how to refine this study. And the way I did that was to look at the target population first, and that includes the region and what I'm exactly wanting to do with this study, and also the theoretical model, which ended up being the self-determination theory, which I'll get into the next several weeks as well, because that's a strategic key point in itself. And so from there, I went into my prospectus class, and I was entering into my third year of my PhD program. And in January of 2020, I traveled back to Phoenix, Arizona for my second residency, and that's where I would meet my two instructors at residency for that program, and that was Dr. Melissa Singer-Pressman and, of course, Dr. June Mall. Dr. Mall ended up being my chair and immediately fast-tracked me on a program to develop into the proposal and work on this study for the next year with her one-on-one. And that's what I ended up doing. I was very grateful and fortunate to be in that position, and just so generous of her to reach out and take me up under her wing as a mentee. And I just am so grateful to her. Anybody who knows my relationship with Dr. Mall, she is amazing. She's the best, and I owe her everything. I'll wholeheartedly admit that. And so getting back to the study and the literature review, as I mentioned, the obesity problem and the last stats of the United States has shown that obesity has risen to nearly 40% of the United States population being obese. If you think about it, I didn't say 40% overweight, which is most of us, about 2/3. I said 40% obese, and that is a huge problem, no pun intended, which continues to grow. And again, in the next 10, 15 years, if it continues like this, by the year 2030, in fact, we may be at 50% population of obesity. That's scary. We need to stop that. And that's why I was hoping that my academic study, my dissertation, could maybe not solve this problem, not resolve it with any types of, key points that we can use to develop in addressing it, but just a very minute, small part of contributing advanced scientific knowledge to really addressing this problem to where other researchers can take this and go forward and hopefully be able to fix the problem someday. And if anything, even if they didn't reverse the obesity, percentage increase, at the very minimal, they can mitigate it and possibly get to the point where we're able to have it neutralized in the future, and then figure out scientifically what can be done. And there are measures that are going into that right now. A lot of dollars are going into research. Some people know about the recent clinical studies involving Mounjaro and Ozempic, and those types of medical ingenuity have certainly addressed obesity and are actually not only reversing it, but really almost curing it from some of the medical doctors that have spoken about different types of medications like that. So who knows? We may be at that point where we can eventually stop this increase and this exponential growth of obesity. So anyway, jumping back into the study, that's what I wanted to do with my participants. I mentioned 10 weeks involving 10 strategic points to go over, and each of those weeks will involve a different participant. This is research participant number 2 today that I'll be talking to, and the only thing I can let you know is that she fits the inclusion criteria of being a millennial in Atlanta, Georgia, working out with a personal trainer on goals. And she does a wonderful job of explaining what self-determination involves with autonomy, competence, relatedness means to her. So I'll be having her on here momentarily. And before I do, I'd like to ask everyone out there, for you please be so kind as to like this video, leave a comment, and even ask a question while you're at it. Share it with your friends and family. Enjoy it. It's about roughly 45 minutes to an hour, depending on which parts that we're listening to on each participant. And I will leave it to you right now to go ahead and invite you to listen to this next research participant here in the dissertation. Okay, everyone, this is Taryn Hoff with Grand Canyon University conducting my research study here for my participant who is on the line. Can my participant please confirm that she can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for being able to do this. My participant has also completed the initial demographic questionnaire and survey. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. And also to confirm, my participant was provided a consent form and did sign and understand the consent form to the survey?
Yes.
And did my participant understand and consent to this interview that we're about to conduct here momentarily?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. And I just want to tell the participant real quick, just as an overview. First of all, thank you very much for your time and coming on here. I appreciate this as we're recording on Zoom. And as we're recording on Zoom, I'm going to at all times protect the participant and never ask her name or any personal information about her, and ask that she also abide by not providing us any information as well, other than what I'm going to ask her during the interview. I want to tell the participant also that you will have an opportunity to receive a full audio dialogue of this recording, as well as the full transcript of our entire interview after we record. This is an exciting research study. You're going to be the first of 10 individuals for this final sample selected as the first of study of its kind, because the study title is we're looking at the self-determination of millennials through realizing their own personal training goals. And as you could tell through the first survey you took, this first survey was going over a little bit about your own self-determination and specifically things about autonomy, competence, and relatedness, of what we'll get to a little further in detail here as well. A few other housekeeping things I did want to tell the participant is that the interview is planned to go for 40 to 60 minutes. At any time, the participant, you have the opportunity to stop the interview for any reason if you want to end it, or if you change your mind and would like not to volunteer for it. It's completely up to you. It is you have the power to do that at any opportunity. Also, at any opportunity, if you don't understand a question, or if there's any reason that we have technical feeds or volume issues or sound quality, please, by all means, let me know if you need me to repeat the question, etc. The questions I'm about to ask you here momentarily are going to kind of delve a little deeper into detail of this self-determination survey you gave me, but also tie into personal training goals and how your achievement relates to yourself. Now, what I want to tell you also, as being part of the final sample, you were selected because of your high scores of both the survey as well as the achievement levels that you've attained through your own personal training and fitness. So what I want to do before we start is just ask you if you have any other questions before we start this interview off.
No other questions. It all sounds great.
Okay, perfect. Great. Well, as we go through this interview, what I'm going to do is, as I mentioned, I'm going to guide the questions geared towards the components of self-determination. And I'll tell you exactly what that means. And I'll try to lay it out in layman's terms and explain it so it's more generalized to understand. And also, not only that, what I'm looking for, there's no right or wrong answers. Your answers are what truthfully is yours. So they're going to be open-ended questions. For the most part, it's going to be asking questions of giving me some examples or descriptions of what your own personal training programs look like. And also, it's going to be geared towards questions that will have a lot of follow-up. So, for example, if you give me an answer, I'm probably going to follow that up by saying, well, can you expound that on a little further? When we get done with the interview, I'm going to leave it to final questions for you that you have of me or any comments that you have of the interview. And then when we finish the interview, the last thing I want to do is to confirm your demographic information so that all of that's correct, that you filled out for the demographic questionnaire. So what I'll do is I'll jump right now into the list of research questions here through the interview.
Right.
The interview questions that I want to ask you, I'm going to start a lot by beginning with autonomy. And I'm going to tell you what my definition and what the self-determination theory of autonomy is here. But before I get to that, the survey that you filled out for us was to help us through what's called a quantitative validated survey, meaning, as you could tell, it was a 5-point Likert scale from not true at all the way to strongly agree and true. And the first research question for my study was, how do millennials describe their self-determination in terms of autonomy, competence, and relatedness? So you, the millennial, took that survey of 24 questions and you answered to help describe your self-determination in terms of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So what that data is going to help us do is to be able to comprise and get 10 participants, including yourself, and find out what commonalities, what themes we can get. And as we go through now for this next part of descriptive information, research question number 2 to start us off will have to do with autonomy. It's, how do millennials describe autonomy as a contributor to realizing their personal training goals? Now, using autonomy for a second as our kind of lead in here, I want to tell you that self-determination theory's definition of autonomy is the desire to be causal agents of one's own life and act in harmony with one's own integrated self. So what that means, kind of to give you an example, someone's autonomy is their own independence to take control of their life and be in control of what they're doing. For example, some of the questions from your survey felt like, for example, I felt a sense of choice of freedom in the things I undertake, or I feel that my decisions reflect what I really want, or I feel my choices express who I really am. That's autonomy in terms of what we're talking about here. So my first interview question to you is this. And again, just be as descriptive as you want, and it's open-ended. Can you please describe whether you had some degree of autonomy, or to what degree your autonomy was? For example, small, none, moderate, large. How did your autonomy look like during your personal training program?
I would say it was middle of the road. My personal training program started by me reaching out to my trainer and saying, okay, I want to do this. I want to train. So the decision in the beginning was completely my own. Um, and throughout, I've been able to adjust. And I don't know if this exactly refers to what you're talking about, but I've been able to also say, I like this exercise. I don't like this specific movement. I want to train this amount of times a week. The scheduling has been my own, and really my goals that I've been able to set have really, I guess I have been able to be autonomous with them.
Okay, very good. So let's talk about that for a second. First of all, in that answer you gave, the decision was your own in terms of a lot of variables, like what exercises you want to do, how many times you want to do it, you'd like to train this many times a week, and et cetera. So let's go in that a little further detail. Can you take us through the process of what that looked like using those examples in a typical personal training, let's say, workout session? Like, for example, give us the dialogue between your trainer and yourself of, in terms of you directing those autonomous decisions.
Sure. So I do. There was one particular exercise where he had me doing boxing, and I really didn't like it, and I can't tell you exactly why,
Mm-hmm.
but the movement itself, I just really did not like. And while he did the personal trainer thing to do when I said I don't like it, which is to push back and say this will get you results, this is online with reaching your goals. I was able to confidently say this is a movement, this is an exercise that I'm thoroughly uncomfortable with. And he took it out of the program and obviously substituted with other movements that would help me reach my goals. So that's just one, I think, more detailed example of how I was able to say, I don't like that movement, it doesn't agree with me, and then change it up.
That's a very good example. Thank you. And, let's, talking about that a little further, because you kind of answered my next question with that answer on the next question being, did you experience any sense of your own choices, freedom, and decisions in your personal training program? You just pretty much gave a great illustration of that with that boxing illustration. So talking about that in a little further detail, with that one example there, is there another example in terms of, let's take it a step to the frequency of the workouts in terms of how many times you were supposed to work out a week? Did that co-align? And if so, how so with your trainer on how many times you should work out, how long you should work out, how intense you should work out? Let's explore that a little, please, and paint us a picture of what that looks like.
Sure. So, and I think I missed this answer in your last question, but basically how it started was I reached out to my trainer and I said, okay, I'm ready. I want to go with you, so that was completely my decision. And then I, off the bat, said, twice a week, I'm ready to work out. To which he replied that, that was fine. And I believe that I can only speak from my experience, but I believe that his goal in general and his mentality towards it was, you start off, especially if you're coming from nothing, you want to start off a few times a week, and then as your body gets more used to being in shape, increase it. So I think about a month or two after I started working out with him, I was the one to come over to him and say, okay, I'm ready to start 3 times a week. And then once we hit 3 times a week, he started adding on homeworks. So that's where he took the personal trainer approach and, more authoritative approach into that. I want you doing homeworks because that's going to just propel us further. That was nothing that I had to say. I actually am not so great with doing the homeworks. And that might be because that wasn't my decision. But I also respect him in the sense that a personal trainer who knows my goals, knows more about fitness than I do, and is able to inform me better on how to reach my goals. So there are certain exercises, if I'm forgetting exactly what it was, there are certain exercises where I don't like doing either. And he says, no, we should continue this. And I go with it. But I also know based on the whole boxing situation that if I was really against it, I could say, no, I don't want to do that. But I also have the mentality of respecting him and respecting his knowledge and how to get me my goals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. And you had mentioned in terms of your trainer maybe having more expertise and following that guidance from his decisions. So let's ask you this. Do you recall if ever there was an exercise, let's say, or a way of doing the program that you wanted to do and you really felt passionate about, but you look back in retrospect now and he might not have agreed with it, and it turns out that he probably was correct? Was there a time that you felt like, I probably wasn't right about that, or I maybe didn't do that the way it should have been? Was there any time like that ever happened?
Yes. So this refers back to the homework I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically, he will give me a variety, like 2 or 3 exercises for 5 minutes or whatever the duration is to do on my own anytime during the week, whether that's the day that we work out, a day we don't. So currently my program is 3 times a week. I either do a 5-minute run, and that doesn't mean that I'm, running and then it has to be the run is 5 minutes. So I could be out for, outside running on the treadmill running for 10 minutes. It just depends exactly the time I was running versus jogging or walking. And then he also said to do an ab exercise for 5 minutes, or he gives me a list of good ab exercises and I time myself 5 minutes and I do about 30 seconds of each or whatever it might be. And he encouraged me to do either of those. So either 2 times a week do the abs, and 1 time a week do running, or vice versa. And I really keep it to running on the days where we work out because of convenience for myself. And he's been trying to encourage me to do some workouts on days where I don't do anything, like do some homeworks on, let's say we don't work out on Mondays, so do an abs on Mondays instead of running. I don't know if I'm describing this very well, but basically I do think that if I took his advice there and worked out on days where I wasn't working out with him and also kept the variety between running and doing abs, I would probably be seeing a little better results than I am.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. Yeah, that's really good information. That answered that question sufficiently. Let's talk now about your personal training program alignment. So, and you've touched on this a little bit too. We'll go into this a little bit more into detail. So specifically, would you say overall, was your personal training program aligned to what really interested you?
Yes.
And can you give us examples further about how those alignments looked? And maybe in addition, were there any times that they weren't aligned to your interests? I know you mentioned the homework, but maybe go a little bit more now specifically about alignment of the program to your interests overall, please.
Sure. So in general, and stop me if my mindset isn't where yours is, but in general, I want to see, in terms of goals physically, I want to see more tonnage within myself. I want to see more energy throughout the day, and I wanted to see my stamina. Like I want to be able to run for, let's say, a mile and just go and just be able to do it without having to stop because of a stitch or hold my breath or whatever. And, just be an overall healthy person, which I think is just the reason that most people start training. And overall, that has been happening. I was able to, I think the beginning of last year, I did my own program and I was able to run a 10-minute mile. And then once, not the beginning of last year, that was the beginning of this year, sorry, once 2020 hit and the virus hit, I definitely, the gym closed, so I stopped going, and effectively my working out stopped. And I was pretty consistent before then. And that's when, after a couple months, that's when I, hired my personal trainer and said, okay, I'm ready. And I was no longer able to run my 10-minute mile, and I was no longer able to even really run for 2 or 3 minutes, like a real run, without, stitching up or running out of breath. So I do feel that I have gotten that. And there has been many struggles with me. Like I mentioned, homework. My main struggle is that I personally don't like working out. I like doing yoga. That's a form of workout that I really love doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I do that on my own sometimes, but my trainer doesn't do that with me. He focuses more on, weights and stamina and running and all of that kind of stuff. So homeworks are particularly difficult for me because I have to be completely autonomous with that. Bring it back to autonomy here. I have to hold myself to that. He asks me at the end of the week, how many homeworks have you done? What have you done? But it's up to me. I don't have a set time where I'm doing it. I don't have a person who's telling me how many reps to do. And I don't have a trainer during those times. So I actually find that the hardest for me to do, even though theoretically 5 minutes every day is not difficult. I don't know if that answered your question.
Absolutely, it did. Yeah, very good. And in fact, you gave me more of what I'd like to address too, because yeah, I made note that you brought up an interesting phenomena that happened in 2020 as we're recording this in terms of COVID-19, the pandemic. So let me ask you this, because you did mention about the gyms closing, and no question that happened here in Atlanta, Georgia. So with you scored very high on self-determination when it came to autonomy questions. For example, things to do with choices and freedom, and things to do with your own interests. So how would you describe how this pandemic affected your choices, your freedom, and your autonomy in terms of working out? You kind of touched on it, but how would you say its impact overall affected your own independence with working out?
Sure. So that's a very interesting question that I'm not sure I can give a straightforward answer to, because like I mentioned, one of my New Year's resolutions ending 2019 into 2020 was to work out. And I actually downloaded one of those workout apps that I really liked. And for a solid 3 months, up until, the offices closed down and all of that, I was 4 times a week, every morning before work. I just, it was completely up to me. I downloaded the app. So that in of itself was a way of keeping me on time, doing, workouts, not having to come up with my own. And that was completely autonomous in terms of my decision, my scheduling. I held myself accountable and I did it completely myself. But I also had help in terms of the gym, and I was able to afford the app, to be quite frank, because money, I think, comes into play as well. And a lot of people were furloughed or let go of their jobs. And, that affects also being able to financially afford a trainer or afford a program. So when I wasn't sure where my financial status was going to be in a few months, I had to cut out some, quote unquote, unnecessary expenses. So one of those was the app that I was paying for. And then the gym closed down. So that really effectively stopped my working out. And I started doing yoga at home, but I wasn't keeping the stamina that I wanted. I wasn't, I was gaining flexibility. I was gaining certain tonnage. I was gaining certain forms of strength. But as people know in general, when yoga and weight training, all of these give you different results. So in terms of the results that I wanted to see personally, it was dwindling. And that's when, I think you can call it autonomy, that I decided, let's reach out to the trainer, let's start up. So I think it's an interesting answer, because I was completely autonomous in the beginning, but I also had help in terms of, financial security and the gym. And then it stopped when Corona hit. And then it was autonomous to, I guess, go with a personal trainer. And that was my complete decision. And once I'm starting it, I'm realizing that if I have to be autonomous in terms of the homeworks, that area is now harder for me than when I have a set time and day scheduled with my trainer. I don't know if I can give you an exact answer, but I guess that's as accurate as I can get.
That's great. Yeah, that's perfect. All of that very much helps answer this research question. And in fact, moving on from autonomy, the next component of self-determination is competence. And so, for example, when we move on to competence here, competence, according to self-determination theory, is, quote, seek to control the outcome and experience mastery. So, for example, it's mainly being confident and understanding a skill set and then mastering that skill set is competence. So how competent is one? And so, for example, in your BPNS survey that you answered, you gave a score of agree, 4 out of 5, to the question, I feel confident that I can do things well. Now, when we transfer that to what we're talking about here with personal training, here is the next research question in general. It's asking, how do millennials describe competence as a contributor to realizing their personal training goals? My first research question to you in this section is, can you please describe whether you had some degree of competence or to what degree your competence was? For example, none, small, moderate, large. Can you kind of go into detail on competence with personal training, please?
Yeah. So I hope I understood, the whole prequel to that, but I feel very competent in terms of my personal training, in terms of, I guess, physically being able to do the movements. I feel that if there's something that I can't currently do that my trainer is asking me to do, I have enough confidence in my ability to get there. As I think that is just a general pattern with training, is once you start, you can't do, I have very low upper body strength, so I find push-ups to be particularly difficult for me. But I know that if I start on my knees and then I can do, 10 of those straight, then I could probably do 3 or 4, on my toes, and eventually I'll reach up to where I can just, do push-ups normally, and my upper body strength will go. So in terms of competence right now with push-ups, it's pretty low. But I know that if I work on it, I'll be able to do it. So I don't know if that totally answers your question or not.
No, that's great. Let me ask you this. How was there a difference of your competence level to working out, would you say, when you first started working out versus after you were working out with your personal trainer? Did it improve? Did it stay the same?
Definitely improved.
Can you give us a percentage, what you might say, like if it was this percentage at this point starting, then it was this percentage by now?
It's a little tough, but I'll do my best. I feel that the beginning of my training, and remember, I was coming off from, I had done my own workouts for 3 months. And I can also relate to that. When I started that workout back in January, it was asked of me to do running. And to mark how much I was able to do running. And like I said, my goal was a 10-minute mile. And in the beginning, I was doing a mile in about 20 to 30 minutes. And then by the end, I was doing my 10-minute mile. So as I worked through that myself, I was able to get to my goal. And then COVID hit, and I probably stopped working out for 3 to 4 months. And that brings me up to a couple months ago when I started with my trainer. I felt that I was in a better shape than ever in terms of being able to start up a new program, because I had been so consistent with my, beginning of the year program. So I think percentage wise, my confidence level with my trainer was probably 60%. And now I would say it's up there to 70-80%.
Okay, good. Let me ask you this. Let's flip-flop the question in an inverse. So you gave us a lot of really good information there of what contributed to achieving your goals and how your competence, it looks like, improved over time. And you even factored in COVID again, it looks like, with the pandemic possibly having an effect on reaching your goals because of having to adjust. But now let me just look at it from the other lens. If, let's say, you made it from 60 to 70% competence and positive of improvement, what would then on the other side, like the 30 or whatever percent that you still are wanting to achieve, what does that look like? Just kind of walk us through, maybe give us a picture of what you foresee your challenges or just insurmountable obstacles that are keeping you from achieving that competence or achieving those goals. What does that look like?
Sure. To be quite frank, anything stopping me is myself. I'm a firm believer in that in general in life, and definitely when it comes to personal training. And I think there's a necessity for myself to factor in health and eating habits. I am on a plant-based diet, which I absolutely love. And through that, I found out that I was lactose intolerant and all of these other things. However, I also know that emotionally and just in general, I love food. So for me, when I eat unhealthily or I eat something, I quote unquote, I cheat, and I eat some meat or rarely dairy because I am lactose intolerant, but I eat some meat or I eat something off of what makes me feel good. It definitely affects my working out. It definitely affects, my goals that I'm trying to get. It definitely, one step back kind of thing. For instance, and I don't know if this is, you know, too much detail or not, but I love pasta. I really, really love pasta. And that's definitely not the healthiest thing to eat. So I have limited myself to pasta once a week. And I do find that it's harder for me to work out when I have eaten pasta or something like that. And in general, just my eating habits, while they're really, I think, above average, I definitely notice that if I refined them a little more, I would probably have better results with training. And also with homeworks, like I mentioned, if I just did my homeworks and I got over myself and my own, like, oh, I'm just feeling lazy, I'm feeling down today, or, some other factors playing into my decision not to do homeworks for that week. I think if I just got over myself and I did the homeworks, I would be literally and figuratively in better shape. And yeah, it's really myself, my own obstacles that, I can, but that's also a matter of taking autonomy and taking responsibility for my own actions.
That's good. And getting back to the competence end of it, when, let's say hypothetically, you put yourself in your trainer's shoes, after everything you've learned from your trainer, how competent would you say you would be if you were the trainer having to teach a novice or a beginner of some of the advanced program that you're now doing?
Can you elaborate on the question a little bit? I'm just a little bit
Sure.
confused about it.
Yeah. So let's say, just for example, you're the trainer now, you're the personal trainer. How confident in your abilities to teach that client or that individual to learn what you know? Would you be not confident at all? Would you be maybe moderately confident, or would you be excellent at showing them what you've mastered in your skill set of personal training exercises?
Sure. I think if we were talking, so basically, just to clarify, you're asking me to put myself in my trainer's shoes, and his ability to be able to be competent with training others or myself.
Yourself, you training other people, if you were the trainer.
Putting myself in his shoes, I would say very competent. And then, yeah, to reverse the question back, it's just myself that needs to get over myself. But in terms of him and being able to train me, I think he's very competent with that.
Good. And let me ask you this. This is next question is part of the competence portion. You've touched on this in terms of your competence percentage and percentage level. But overall, how successful were you in achieving your personal training goals, would you say?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
No problem. Yeah. And you don't have to give a percentage on this. This is totally open-ended. So basically, how successful were you in achieving your personal training goals?
With my trainer or previously, if you can elaborate on that a little more.
With your trainer at the end of this. Yeah. Currently, like today, where are you at right now with that?
I think I'm pretty far along. I think I'm a little, this question is a little tough for me to answer because I am very much of the mindset in general in life that there's always more, because you can never be perfect, but at the same time, there's always more you could do. So keeping that, standard that I kind of have in life and in training, I would say that I'm very competent. my ability to train has definitely reached a place where I'm happy, but I'm always looking to push harder and work harder.
Mm-hmm. And let me ask this too. You touched on mentioning the pandemic when we were just talking about this whole competence portion as well. Would you say that was there anything that came out of this pandemic that might have been a good thing for you to have improved your competence? So, for example, what I'm asking is because the gym's closed and you had to be more resourceful and think outside the box or think alternatively. Was there a time that this pandemic, looking back now in self-reflection, that you might say, hey, I got better at this, or I improved, I was more capable of this because of having to go this route, or not at all? Is that totally not relevant at all?
I'm assuming you're talking about training specifically instead of just general day to day.
Right, right.
Right.
Overall with your training. Exactly.
Overall with my training, sorry, my brain just did a thing. Give me a second.
That's okay.
Overall with my training, due to the pandemic, I would say that I have, in terms of competence, I'm not sure really uh, improved, but in terms of being creative with my training, um, and being, I guess, more autonomous, there was definitely a struggle, like I mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
of doing that. But then, getting a grip on myself and being able to do it, like, I would always, before the pandemic, I would definitely use a treadmill for running. And like we both mentioned, the gyms closed down and I was no longer able to do that. So I had to kind of, so to say, suck it up and just run outside. Um, and I live in a place where I could do that. So that's great. So I guess I think my running became better in general, because running on a treadmill, while you can adjust the height of it, and if you're going uphill or downhill, running on actual, concrete or grass or whatever it might be, definitely is more difficult. So I think my running, I became more competent with that. But everything else, I'd say once I got over, the months of not working out, I would say the competence hasn't really super increased. It just
Okay.
kind of plateaued and stayed the same.
Mm-hmm.
Except for that, like I'm at that, 70 to 80%. I always want to get more. Yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Good. And that's good. Going on that a little further, if your trainer was here right now and we asked him to judge your competence level, would he be happy, or would he think that there needs improvement? Or how do you think he would answer if we asked him his opinion of your competence to all the workouts and exercises that you've been working on together with him?
Sure, trying to take myself out of my personal biases out of the equation there.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that he would be a little less impressed with where I've come, and he would want me to be more competent than I am,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely see the improvement from beginning to where we are now.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Excellent. Let me ask you one more thing about competence here. No, I'm sorry. Let me repeat.
Mhm.
Correct myself. That's it for competence.
Okay,
Actually,
cool.
I did ask you that last question on competence. So I want to now move forward and talk to you a little bit about the next component of self-determination. This is called relatedness, and the question overall that we're trying to ask in our research question on this part is, how do millennials describe relatedness as a contributor to personal training goals? So as this, we'll go back to the survey here for a second. When we had asked you on the survey, just general questions
Mhm.
about self-determination, not to do necessarily personal training, just self-determination. The question was asked on the Likert scale, 1 through 5. I feel that the people I care about also care about me, and you gave it a agree, 4, number 4 of agree with that statement. So that tells us, with looking at this relatedness, we're going to talk about this for a little bit here, as in terms of personal training. Now that's the
Mhm.
route we're switching to. Relatedness, by definition, according to self-determination theory, is the willing to interact with, be connected to, and experience care for others. So in other words, what we want to look at relatedness in the layman's term is how is that social desirability or belongingness with others. So when I ask you this question, this is the first one that I'll ask you about relatedness. can you please describe whether you had some degree of relatedness or to what degree your relatedness was, whether it was zero, small, moderate, or large, in terms of your personal training program?
In terms of personal training. So I'm not quite sure that I understand that question. Is there any way to elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. Why don't we give you an example? So
Sure.
here's an example. Personal training, as you've learned, is a lot to do with social interaction.
Mhm.
And so, for example, let me just ask you a real specific question in terms of personal training and relatedness. How important is it to you that you can relate to your trainer? So, was that an important decision that you have your trainer be able to relate to the way your own values and personal goals are? Or is that not a consideration at all? Or is it somewhere in the
Gotcha.
middle? What does that look like to you?
Gotcha. Yeah. I definitely chose my trainer because I think that each trainer kind of has their program, has their mentality, has their, general, I'm forgetting the word, but their way of training. Oh, there's a word for it. I'm just forgetting it. Kind of their motto, maybe.
Okay, sure. Philosophy.
Philosophy and all of that. And I definitely chose my trainer because I felt a sense of relatedness in that, that I felt like he would be able to get me to the goals that I want, specifically because that's his general motto for training. So the relatedness definitely had to be there for me. I think with training in general, it's important, not just for me, but for others to relate to their trainer confidently, because you have to have a set goals. You have to have kind of shared goals and an understanding of what your goals are and a confidence in your trainer to be able to get you there.
No, that's good. Let me ask you this a little bit more specifically here. Can you give an example of the relatedness you have with your personal trainer in this whole process? So during your personal training program, give us, paint us a picture. What does your relatedness to him look like?
Sure. So, of course, I went in with a goal. I wanted more tonnage. I wanted more stamina. So he understood that. He heard that. So he definitely catered the workouts to, let's work on cardio. Let's work on athletic movements to be able to keep me moving athletically and my stamina up. So that conversation was had, and there was definitely relatedness there. I also wanted to focus, like I mentioned, my upper body is generally weak, and that's not a particular goal of mine to get it stronger. Doing upper body is definitely a rounded overall training program, so we definitely include it, but we focus mostly on improving lower body, abdominal muscles and stamina and athletic movement, because we had that conversation and because, we related to each other in terms of that goal.
And that's good. Let me ask you, with the relationship that you have with your trainer, let's ask the question of, would you say that for generally speaking, were there warm feelings for the majority of the time that you spend with your trainer, in terms of there's warmth and care? How does that look? Is there none? Is there a fair amount? Is there a lot? Or is that important? What does that look
Sure.
like?
So I think it's moderately important to have that feeling.
hmm
For me, when I look at a training session, it's
hmm
more, I also need someone to be tough on me, and you're not necessarily going to feel, the warm feelings, the mutual connection, because be tough on me,
hmm
tell me to give you two more reps. And I also naturally don't like that. Like I
Mm.
mentioned in the beginning, I don't like working out. It's a huge challenge for me, but something that I believe is important in life. Um, to stay healthy, to stay fit, to stay athletic. So I specifically want, I guess it just doesn't really matter too much that I have the, as you said, the warm feeling with my trainer. I do intellectually know that, the care is there. I think a personal trainer, it's important for, him or her to care about their clients and to care about goals and all of that stuff. So intellectually, I know it's there, but I don't necessarily look for it and care to feel that in a session. I more care to feel the burn, so to say.
Okay. And that's good. Another answer that you gave in the survey, for example, when we looked at a relatedness question of, I feel close and connected with other people who are important to me. You were very neutral on that. And you were right in the middle, again, not true or completely true. You were right there in the center of it. So would you say, is that fair to assume that's the same in personal training? In other words, for example, let's just say hypothetically that you trained with another trainer. If is the connection to that trainer important, or the warmth and the care, or is it not? Like, as long as they're, like you said just a few moments ago, giving you a great workout and you're getting your goals, is that the most important? What does that look like in terms of relatedness?
Yeah. So yeah, I don't really I don't really care in terms of, the emotional connection there. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely just want a good workout.
Mm-hmm.
And I do tend, it's hard for me to take myself out of this because I do tend to be a warm, caring person,
Mm-hmm.
just myself in general with anyone I meet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I always in the back of my mind think like, oh, it'd be nice if there was an emotional connection there with my trainer. But any trainer, I think I would just, that's definitely bottom of my list in terms of, any trainer in general.
That's interesting. Now, um, before we move forward past relatedness, because I want to touch on this, I think this is important, what you just said. The three components that I'm asking about with self-determination, we've
Mhm.
talked about autonomy, we've talked about competence, we've talked about relatedness. And where would you rank those in terms of how important they are to achieving your personal training goals? In other words, one, two, or three. One's the most important, two's the second most important, third is the third most important: autonomy, competence, relatedness. Where do you put those at for yourself in achieving your personal training goals?
I definitely put autonomy number one, competence number two, and relatedness number three.
Right. And your answer there pretty much co-aligns with the last 30, 40 minutes, what we've been talking about
Hmm.
with how they contribute to your goals. So that's really interesting. Now, you had also mentioned about emotions. And as we know, the pandemic created a lot of emotional disturbance because it created social separation,
Hmm.
social isolation, quarantining, separation, just in general. Um, from what I gather then, and I'm not going to make the assumption, but let me ask you this. Was COVID, or was the pandemic of keeping you away from others in the gym and such, did that play a factor at all? No factor, minimal factor, a lot of factor? So again, the question is, how did this pandemic influence, if at all, your relatedness in terms of personal training program?
So it's funny that you mentioned that because I do tend to be self-conscious about when I'm training, and I actually don't like, being around others. I don't like, I've tried like group yoga sessions and I don't like those. I really rather do it on my own.
Mm-hmm.
So working out with a trainer while, you know, I have my own things that, I just don't like working out in general. I think it's easier for me to work out one-on-one with a trainer than in a gym, surrounded by other people. Just personally, in terms of relatedness, while I tend to be a warm person and I love people, and that affected, COVID affected me like that, completely off topic, of training. Going to the gym is definitely harder for me than just having a one-on-one session with a personal trainer.
No, that's interesting. And then, in terms of just exploring a little bit more specific into detail, your trainer during your sessions, do you feel like your trainer could relate to how you feel emotionally? And for example, can your trainer put himself in your shoes and know exactly how hard those exercises are for you? Do they give you enough credit in terms of relating to you and knowing that you're trying your hardest? Or on the flip side, do you think that it's hard for your trainer to relate to you? Or is it somewhere in the middle? What does that look like?
I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think because my trainers hope for me an expectation, and in terms of how rapidly I'm improving, is what I think is correct, but what I personally just am constantly fighting. Like, I rather, slow and steady wins the race. And I specifically go to him because he pushes me past what I, theoretically want into what I really want. Um, so I think in terms of sympathy of not being able to do a specific exercise, again, for the boxing, he definitely related to me. I don't know if he related to me or just heard that I didn't want to do it and I couldn't do it. And I was very uncomfortable doing it and then took it out of our session versus, I say I can't push-ups. Push-ups are difficult for me. I can't do it. Or, better term is pull-ups. I really cannot do a single pull-up.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say I can't do a pull-up, he's like, we're going to try. We're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I honestly don't know. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think I would like more sympathy, but that's just kind of, the cop out in me wanting to not do an exercise. So I think in a way, I value the lack of sympathy and the amount that he can push me, if that makes sense.
Good. No. Good information. Very good. Okay. I'd like to move forward then. That is it for relatedness. I just have a few more questions for you, please. General questions here, kind of to explore, we're tying this all together now. We're going to summarize kind of what we just talked about. We have a better understanding now of your self-determination, what motivates you. And let me ask you this. This is the question. And again, very open-ended. You can answer it however you perceive this question. How does your generation, in other words, how do the millennials, anybody aged 24 through 39, how do they compare to other generations, such as the older generation or even younger people, in terms of self-determination?
Is that specifically with, training and fitness or in general?
It could be both, actually, because that question, I guess maybe answer it first in general. How are the different generations compared in self-determination? Just very, very general. And then that was going to be my follow-up specifically with personal training. Yeah. So please give us the broad general answer and then narrow that down to how that ties into personal training in differences, please.
Sure. So I've actually pondered this question myself, and I think a lot of people have. It's such a difficult question to answer because if I'm to bring it in personally, for instance, I look at my father, and in certain ways, he's more self-determined than I am. I think his work ethic is better than mine. I do get my work ethic from him a lot, so that helps me. But looking at the broader, my generation, I think work ethic is very different. But then again, it's hard to compare because we have so much more technology than the previous generation. So we've been able to, soar in terms of, finding a career that we like versus finding a career that theoretically is good for us. And I think I'm going on a lot of tangents here because my brain is going a mile a minute.
No, that's good.
This question is so fascinating.
Sure.
So I think in terms of competence, for instance, okay, here's a more specific example. Being a homeowner or taking care of a home, I actually find that the previous generation is more competent in terms of knowing how to, do basics like switch out a light bulb or, pay bills or whatever it is like that. I think that they're more competent than my generation. But in terms of technology and being able to forward their careers and their lives with technology, my generation is definitely more competent in that than the previous. And then to tie that into personal training, I think there has been a wave and an onslaught of focus on health, both physical, mental, all of that. I think that is more focused on in my generation than it was in the past. Staying fit, there's a whole gym culture that I think has exploded in the past couple of years, specifically with my generation. And also, to go back to health as well, I think, focusing your diet, your day-to-day eating on health and on what your body is good for, I think that's more exploded than ever. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thank you. And I want to now move forward to just confirming your demographic information you
Mm-hmm.
provided us. In the demographic questionnaire, and just please confirm with me, according to our results here, you are a 27-year-old female of the white/Caucasian ethnicity.
Correct.
And in terms of how long you've been working out with a personal trainer, we answered roughly 6 months to 1 year.
Yes.
And then,
yeah, that's.
And on average, how many times you work out with a personal trainer? The answer was 3 or more times per week.
Yes.
Okay. And then on the body fat percentage, we guesstimated best to say if your beginning body fat was 20, then you're below the average. So somewhere in the upper teens, 18 to 19%.
Yes.
And then finally, since your goal was not to necessarily lose weight, you were at 100 pounds and stayed about 100 pounds, and we're happy with that result as well.
Yes.
Okay, good. And then the last question I have is any questions that you have? I don't have any questions. I'm sorry. I'm turning around to you. Do you have any questions about this interview or any other comments you'd like to make at this time?
No, I don't. This is great and very thorough. I liked it.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Well, I want to tell you, you answered every single question 100% and to the fullest of your capabilities. And I don't think there were any problems or errors or mistakes in any event. So I do want to thank you very much for doing this interview. There's a few things I want to also tell you before we wrap up. I'm going to hit the stop button here momentarily, but I want to let you know when I do, please don't hang up because I just want to, for the record, tell you that, again, I really appreciate your time. This is a wonderful addition to our study, as you'll be one of 10 individuals in the final sample. I have been told that this is a unique first of its kind study that's going to be published as a dissertation. You will have the results of our audio interview as well as your transcript sent to you. I'm going to send that to you for what's called member checking. In other words, I'd like to ensure that if you have the opportunity to listen to the audio or read the transcript, if there's anything that comes out that you want to edit or modify, or if you think that was just incorrect or you didn't say it correctly, by all means, that's your opportunity to get back to us and let me know that we can change that. So you'll have that. And also the dissertation itself is set to be published fairly soon, sometime within the next couple months. So I do want to reiterate, it's very important that your rights will be protected at all times. Everything will be anonymous and confidential. Your name will never be released. This information will stay secured on an encrypted, password-protected computer. All data will be saved and then destroyed after 3 years. So again, I can't thank you enough. If you have any other questions, otherwise, I will stop the recording right now.